Another person that I was very sad to hear had passed was Lin Ottinger. If you've ever been in Moab and you've gone to the rock shop, you know Lin Ottinger. And that is probably one of the most amazing rock shops around. And so Jim Kirkland's going to speak about him.
Certainly. Yeah, I have to honestly say that if Lin Ottinger had not had that rock shop, I would not have this job. He hired a fellow by the name of Rob Gaston as a student to come visit Moab in the summers, and he'd work at the cash register, and on his spare time he'd go exploring. And Rob found a pretty significant site that we call the Gaston Quarry. And I came in and he had a few things that he found on the slope there on exhibit. They weren't selling them, they were on exhibit. And in fact, talking to Lin, it turns out Lin had, Jim Jensen, several major sites, Utah Raptor State Park. Lin Ottinger is the one that reported that to the Bureau of Land Management. It had been known by locals, but he was the first one to really talk to Jim Jensen about it seriously, as I understand. And got BYU working on that site, which is now our Utah Raptor State Park, that will be opening on April 25th. So you can all be prepared to go to that opening. It should be quite an event, I think. We've been waiting a few years to see that happen. But Lin, he was this old curmudgeon. I always pictured Lin, from the day I met him, I pictured him having his picture in National Geographic, as a classic Western curmudgeon. Lin, came out west initially, relative to the early uranium boom, and fell in love with the Moab region. And, we just got to show this to people. That was when, Moab was a crossroads. There was no canyon lands there. Arches existed, but you had to drive in from the east side and really needed a four-wheel drive to get in there. It was just after they, had started making trails within the park. And Lin started his Canyonland tours using Volkswagen minibuses, and they would cruise around Canyonlands, and Lin would take and show them where there's dinosaur bones that they could collect. So a lot of tourists from his group brought home bones all over the country. There are bones, I'm sure, probably in people's rock gardens, sadly, from the Moab area from his trips. But when Canyonlands was created, since Lin had the venue already, he was grandfathered in and continued with the Canyonland tours, for almost 30 years after the opening of Canyonlands. And when he finally retired, they set it up so he couldn't just pass it on to his kids. And the Canyonland tours stopped about a decade or so ago. But basically, that was part of the history of Moab in a very significant way. But I went into that rock shop on my way west to visit some fossil sites I was going to be working on, and stopped in there and saw some ankylosaur armor, the bony plates from the back of an ankylosaur on a shelf. And I saw that stuff and walked up and asked the guy at the desk, where did that stuff come from? Because I had just found the first Jurassic ankylosaur ever discovered. So I was pretty excited about seeing more. And the guy at the desk said, that's from the Morrison Formation. So I basically went and talked to him and said, we got to see this site. Turns out it was from the early Cretaceous. And as we dug that site, we found Utah Raptor. But Lin donated all that material to the Prehistoric Museum. He initially found the Bodley site, theses done from that. He did shows in Good Morning America about bone theft in Utah. People said, well, he's a rock shop owner. He's the enemy. But, he did Good Morning America, where he was virtually in tears on sites he'd been taking his Canyonland tours to for decades, and someone had dynamited this ledge full of dinosaur bones to get the bone. And he was like, this should have been protected forever. Lin knew the difference between, just picking something off the ground and selling it and destroying a landmark locality. And this would have been in Utah Raptor State Park now if it hadn't been destroyed. by vandals back almost 20 years, well, 25 years ago now. I'm an old guy. But I have to really, admit, a lot of people will say, oh, see, Lin got your job. You had nothing to do with it. I say, well, I had a few things to do with it. But I have to say, if Lin had not hired Rob, Lin had not donated these specimens, we had not gone out to the site, we would not have a Utah Raptor State Park. I would not be the state paleontologist of Utah. And probably 120 or so dinosaurs that we've named in the last 30 years would not have been discovered. Well, 20 of them from Grand Staircase would have been, but almost 100 wouldn't have been. So anyway, let's all, tip one for Lin, because, he was a real Utah institution.